Good afternoon and welcome to the WiCyS and CXPA NAIDOC event in celebration of the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. To start with, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are each gathered here today. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I also extend that.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, and thank you to Anne for our introduction and acknowledgement to country. We're very excited today to be hosting this very special NAIDOC event, and of course we're very privileged to have Arkeria with us, who's in Victoria, which is very exciting, who's going to talk to us today about her career in art. And we're also going to talk about the painting that she has in the background, what it means to her, but also looking at how important mentoring was as well. And I'll be joined with some other fellow panelists. Before we move on to the very first question, Arkeria, I just wanted to quickly mention a few things about you, and that is that first of all, you have a beautiful name, Arkeria Rose, named after your grandmother, I believe. You're a Gamilarey artist and born in South Australia in a place called Kaduna. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. And from the age of 7 to 18, you travelled and lived in the outback of Australia with your family. Your father was a gold prospector, and his name is Don Briggs, who's also an artist. You went to La Trobe University, and so you were also discovered by Michelle Arends, an art buyer from the Netherlands, who is now, I guess, a very close partner, and also selling your art in the Netherlands, which is very, very exciting. So welcome, Arkeria.
Thank you.
Arkeria, I might actually start with the first question around, you obviously started art at a very, very young age. And I'm just curious to know, what was it, or when did you actually realise that was your passion?
So I think I've always been artistic in some form. Travelling Australia for those years definitely inspired that passion. Seeing all of Outback Australia and living in remote Aboriginal communities really sparked that interest for me to show my culture in an artistic way. Both of my grandparents, so my grandmother and my grandfather, were artistic and played a large part in that. So yeah, I think it was a combination of things that really sparked that interest. Throughout my degree, I always had some sort of an art subject linked to my course, just so that I had an outlet to express myself. But it wasn't until my final year of university that I met Michelle and sort of then...
Now?
And so my grandmother was a sand storyteller. So whenever she'd sit on the ground, she would then draw the story in the earth. So it was the way that she showed her story through lines in the sand that really captures the way that I design my paintings. And then my grandfather is a dot painter, currently living in Shepparton, so in Victoria, so about 2 hours away. And all of his work is then depicted by dots. So that's the other style of my art, I suppose, that they both fused together and created the way that I paint.
Yes, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that shortly. Okay, well, we've got a question from Anne, our next panelist. So I'll transition to Anne.
Arkeria, there's no written language for Australian Aboriginal people. So in order to convey important cultural stories through the generations, symbols or icons are used in artwork, and Indigenous art is centred on storytelling. Can you share with us the approach you use to depict the stories in your art?
Yes, I will start by quoting my late grandmother, who used to say that language is our soul. So when she would tell stories, we would all sit and listen to her both speak in language and then in English. So that strength in storytelling and passing down to generations is, you know, a very important part of Aboriginal culture. So then for me to be able to take those stories and express them through artwork is something that I hold very, very dear. So I can talk a little bit to the painting that I've got behind me. So my grandmother then gave me the name Lily Rose after the water lilies. So that's my connection to our land and our culture. So when I think about painting myself in a painting, this section here actually tells of the water lily and its stages of growth. So this sort of symbolises the water lily in its state and its place on country. Also being Gamilaroi, we are very connected to the river system. So I've painted that down the bottom. I don't know if you can see very clearly, but that's all of these shapes and lines down the bottom here that connects me to country. And then also being from a very strong matriarchal family, I've then put the women sitting down in the camps in these sections here. And then, of course, our land and our country is rooted strongly behind us all. So, yeah, so when I do paint, I use different symbols to represent things, but also to represent myself in that space. And having the name Lily Rose really, I suppose, to me, centres where I am in that place and what part I tell in that story. So yeah, I do use a range of ways to paint.
So there's a part of you in every painting then?
In the stories that I suppose I'm exploring more about my connection to my culture. I do have other stories where my daughter's a butterfly, so I do representations of her wings as a part of her story. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Jane has a question.
Hi, Arkeria. Thank you for coming today. It's absolutely fascinating listening to your passion and art. I guess for many of us on this call today, like mentoring has played a significant part of who we are today. I'd be interested to hear if you can share with us the impact of mentoring and what it has had on you.
I suppose my first part of mentoring is my family. I've been very blessed that, of course, I had my grandparents mentor me from an art and a cultural perspective, but also my parents mentor how they lived their life. So traveling Australia and that aspect of it, and really having that respect for country. I suppose the next mentor that has really changed the way that I look at my artwork would be my agent, Michelle. So he took me through more of that process of how to sell my art and how to represent myself in that space. And then another aspect of mentoring that's very close to me is I work for a health network, which mentors young Aboriginal women in health careers. So I run a variety of programs that supports them in their career in health and their journeys moving forward. So that idea of having a range of people in your life that add to different aspects of who you are is really special and important, and they show you the directions to move in and how to adapt to situations. So yeah, it does play a large part in who I am and where I've gotten to today. So yeah,
that's fabulous. That's wonderful. I guess following on that, I guess have you got any good mentoring advice that you would like to share to us today? a nug, and one piece of information that you think is really worth sharing in regards to mentoring.
For me, like, mentoring is all about those relationships. I think, to successfully mentor somebody, you really have to have that relationship with them. It's not just about one part of who they are. So the mentors that I have carried on for many, many years, and they know who I am and they value who I am outside of my workplace. Really building a strong relationship so that sometimes when that tough advice needs to be had, it does come from a place of love and respect. So, yeah.
Thank you.
For me, I suppose it's that, listening to Aboriginal stories and taking the time to have those conversations with Aboriginal people is a great place to start. So platforms like this where, I think that you can hear different perspectives and have conversations around those issues is really, really important. I'm also a big believer in self-education. So there is so much stuff online now. A lot of very strong First Nations people putting their voices out there. So, read away and watch and, really listen and take that time for your own personal growth. I know that I do. It's heartwarming to watch, for me personally, to, hear other Aboriginal people's stories. I know so many wonderful films that have come out this year, a range of literature that's being published, and it's really, I think, uplifting, looking towards the future, especially for future generations when you're thinking about those things.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right about the films. And in fact, I'll be able to send some links out around, I did some research around the number of the most popular books written this year around the Aboriginal culture and also some films as well. We do have a few questions coming in.
Becoming a mother, I think, was a big one. I was pregnant through my first solo exhibition when I went to Rotterdam, and then took her overseas at 3 months. So I think that whole experience really inspired the way that I paint, and also reflecting on the stories that my grandmother had shared with me. So, really taking the time to have conversations with my own mum and explore that relationship, and then think about how I wanted to paint that. So that was a big one. Also traveling Australia. So, painting the different lands that I'd lived on, and really taking the time to think about this beautiful country that we're so blessed to live on. So, I think they're probably two of the biggest.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd say, so your travel to Amsterdam would have made some sort of influential difference too. So we do have a question from Stephanie, and that is mentoring, thinking of listening, how you listen to others, how you support identity of First Nation young women through mentoring.
So when I work with the young Aboriginal women, we really explore their own identities and how they feel about their Aboriginal culture. We do have a range of girls that, because of the stolen generation, are really at that stage of finding out who they are and their connections back to their culture. So that plays a large role in the things that we do, so that we're not only just looking at their careers moving forward. It's also about really listening to their wants and needs, and developing programs that really support who they are as young Aboriginal women, to then find that inner strength to tackle anything that comes.
This is a question asked from one of our peers. What, in your opinion, is the role of the artist in today's society, and in particular, the role of the female artist?
I know for myself, as an Aboriginal artist, for me, it's really about sharing those stories to create environments of which conversations can be had. So one of my favourite things about creating art and then having exhibitions is then really getting to spend the time with the people who come in and view your art. It sparks conversation as to the stories that you've painted, but also my culture and my story and my history. So it's really creating spaces to share that conversation.
Like how do you determine whether a painting is going to really strike out to people?
Mm-hmm. I think for me it's quite interesting that when I've spoken to people and they've picked a particular piece, how when you explore that further, they then find connections in it. I know with my mum is she'll like particular paintings and they're usually really linked to our stories as a family. Yeah, I think I always try and do a variety of stories. So that gives a little bit of diversity in terms of when I'm planning for an exhibition, so that I do use, a range of colours and things like that. But you never really know. You can love a piece and it doesn't sit as well for everybody else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a question from Ritu, I think, from our WiCyS community. Ritu asked the questions, how do you establish yourself in a very different culture and how do you influence others with your ideas?
That's a tricky one, and I still, I think, struggle with that every day. Is the way that my mind works doesn't necessarily work the same way for everybody else. And that comes to the forefront, I think, sometimes when I am working with Michelle, my agent, who's, a male and brought up in a very different culture, and you're both trying to find the best way to promote your artwork, and the way that my mind works doesn't necessarily always flow with his, so you try and find that balance. But I think the more conversations you have with people, the more they realize that maybe not everything is meant to be done in a certain way. I know in the health organisation that I work for, we're very much about decolonising the way that we think and the way that we operate, so that we are making sure that we celebrate our culture and use different resources that are created by Aboriginal people, and really think about creating safe spaces for Aboriginal people to work in. So yeah, I think it's just, listening to other people's ideas and seeing where they're coming from, and just changing the way that we think about things all the time. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you. And I think, Jane, we had another question that came through.
Yeah, this one's from one of our male board members, Kevin. He's asking, what advice would you give a young person starting off their career or journey in a field where they don't feel very confident?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think for me, who's someone who's found mentors in a range of different ways. So, not only from my work, but also from my family, is, really valuing your support system and using them in a way that best supports you. So, I've got my parents, but then also my grandparents, and I'm just constantly having different conversations with all of them, and they all bring special advice to that space. As an artist, it's surrounding yourself with like-minded people to really bring that confidence up. And just constantly being in the space ready to learn too, I think. always upskilling. So, you know, really, I suppose with this year and COVID too, there's been so many online opportunities to, you know, explore all the different things that are happening around us. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's some great advice there.
Thank you, Arkeria. So, Kira, let's talk a little bit about the organisation that your other job that you undertake as well. You work in mental health side of things. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you potentially incorporate art into that particular role? Because I'm sure you would bring in some sort of perspective that of which they would value, but interested also to understand, I guess, you know, art is also a way that people overcome, you know, certain challenges and use it to heal themselves. And so do you sort of incorporate that into your role there?
Yeah, we do a range of activities, and I think for me, you know, is that things like painting and weaving and dance and song really create spaces for people to connect with culture, but also spend time with each other and really connect as a community. So for the young women, we do things like weaving days and different events, but it's not really about the practice of becoming the best weaver. It's, you know, that they've really made the time to spend that time with each other and to have conversations about how they're feeling, or you know, to be there to give each other advice and to build relationships as peers and really support each other through that journey. We've now got a group of girls who we started working with at 15, and they're now in their 20s, becoming nurses and midwives, and they still all connect via phone and check in on each other, and we hop online for monthly Zoom catch-ups and things like that. And it's really, you know, uplifting for them to have other young women who are having similar experiences.
Fantastic. And so I actually also wanted to understand a little bit more about yourself and apart from talking about, you know, your mentors and your culture, how else do you find inspiration for your art?
I think with each exhibition that I create, usually there's a different theme to it. And like a lot of things, it's you know, taking the time to research through other medias. So when I painted an exhibition that was just all about living on country, I went through all of my photo albums and looked at the images of when we lived there and talked to my mum and dad about those experiences, so that you know, you feel those emotions again and you're inspired by those experiences. Also thinking about my relationships, so my connection to my family and where I'm placed in all of that. You know, a lot of my family have also written a lot of their story down. So I still reread through some of that and, you know, find inspiration in that way. Yeah.
And I think also one of the things that I'm keen to also know, I'm starting to dig in a little bit more on the personal side of things. So don't answer if you don't want to. But what are some of your favourite cultural traditions?
Mm-hmm. Going back home, so being back in New South Wales with our extended family. I don't think I do it enough. So probably being back on the country where I know my grandmother was born. Still go over and visit my grandfather at least once every couple of months. So I think having that time with him where he shares what he's been up to as well So even though he doesn't sell his artwork, he's always painting something or making something, and yeah, really being able to share that experience with him. Being out on country, so as a family we do camp a lot, so really taking that time to be away from technology and just sitting around a fire and spending that time together probably is another one. Yeah, family's a massive part of my life, so yeah.
I love the sitting around of the campfire. Just, you know, it's something that we all can't wait to do. We do have another question that's come through from Ritu, who's from our WiCyS community, and it's quite a you know, a technical space, Arkeria. Now, what Ritu is asking, who Ritu is actually from India, and she migrated to Australia, I think, over 12 months ago. But she says that I really feel it's interesting and definitely a great way of communication through learning, but she wants to understand your thinking on motivating technical people to, I guess, to start to look at art and craft, and that's, you know, there's such different things. Mm-hmm. You know, what would you, I guess, recommend in how they can start to go into that space?
Yeah, I know for me, recently with just the current situation with COVID, is that I made a little pact to myself that I would weave every night instead of looking on my Facebook. So really taking that time to do something for myself. You know, I think we're contactable 24 hours a day now with our phones and working from home. So we're always checking on our computers and doing stuff that way. So taking that little bit of time each day for yourself to maybe explore something that you didn't think you were capable of doing. Even though I'm a visual artist working on canvas, I've only just started weaving more this year. There's a lot of online classes and tutorials, so you can sort of, you know, log on and buy yourself a little pack of weaving resources and then log on.
I think that you had planned for in August this year or September had to be cancelled, similar to many other cultural artists across the globe. That would have been quite disappointing for you. How did you overcome that?
I think I just took it as a positive to have more time to work on some different ideas, to, you know, yeah, to really explore if I wanted to go in a different direction, tried to see the positive side in it. Yeah, and I think, you know, so much of our lives are online now that you can sort of still get your voice out there and what you're doing. So, you know, a lot of my online stores were still running with the companies that I work with. So that sort of was a bonus in that regard, that I was still able to paint for galleries, even though they may not be open in a physical space. Yeah, so just finding.
Tell us a little bit about your upcoming exhibition in February, and what we can expect to see. Obviously, the painting in the background there, which we're probably all going to want to buy. I don't know how we're going to do that, but if you could tell us a little bit about the February exhibition.
Yes, so the exhibition I'll be having in February will be at a gallery space in Castlemaine, which is about 2 hours out of Melbourne. So it'll be running for about a month, so all of February. In this exhibition, I am exploring, I suppose, how I've sort of been feeling over the last 12 months. So, you know, my connections to country and to family, and where I sort of fit into all of that at the moment. Yeah, I haven't been home in a long time, so I think finding ways to connect with the stories from my family from New South Wales has been a big part of it. Each of my paintings is named after a Gamilaroi word, so I always use my language when titling my pieces. So the one behind me is called Yulimbu, which means long ago. So it's that idea that our stories have been passed down from generation to generation, and that we're still living on this country today and we're still sharing those stories. And so that's why I've painted myself in that piece as well. But yeah, very excited to meet some of you if you can make it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think we might organise a bus trip down there. That'll be lots of fun. I do have a couple of questions that have come through. One of them is from Viraj Gandhi, who's from our WiCyS community in the USA at the moment. She says, Arkeria, you were born an artist, very impressive paintings. Which painting do you consider to be your...
Paint a diptych for my exhibition in 2019, which is when you put two paintings together. And it was the first piece that I'd done as a self-portrait. So it explored all the stages of the water lily and how I suppose I feel like I'm growing into that name and growing into myself. And then the circle in the center was myself, and then there were cream colors all in the background. And it was really showing, you know, that at different stages you find that the water around you can be murky and you can't find your position or place in the world. But that, because I felt the strength that I was rooted with the name of the water lily, that's what was moving my journey forward, I suppose. So for me, that would be the painting that, yeah, I think I was most proud of painting.
And where is that painting now? Is it still in Australia?
No, that was sold over in Rotterdam, and I met the couple that bought it, which was really special too.
Yes,
so,
it is indeed.
Yeah.
And how do you decide what goes to Rotterdam, what stays here? How do you make that decision?
So I've had 2 exhibitions and then a couple of group exhibitions over there. So I usually paint for an exhibition, and then I paint stock for Michelle. So I'll plan an exhibition for every 2 to 3 years and then just paint stock in between, which are normally smaller pieces. So they might be similar or be around the same theme to something that I've painted already, so that I'll do a collection of similar pieces. So it's an Aboriginal health network that I'm currently employed by. So I run the Nyan Gainko Mankey program, which works with young Aboriginal women in health careers. But it's really a network of Aboriginal and First Australian and Australian health professionals that all come together in that space. So yeah.
Thank you. And we've got those links up on the page now, and we'll also send out a follow-up email with this information, as well as those lists that I mentioned earlier on around the latest Aboriginal films and books as well. So this is the end of our session. We don't have any other questions at the moment. Arkeria, it's been an absolute privilege. We can't wait to come down to Castlemaine and actually meet you in real life. It's going to be very exciting. But I did want to mention again, the purpose of our event today